Good day and welcome to the Bomisco Data Leadership Series. This is the first of many, I hope. And today we're here to talk about applying AI and data to retail intelligence. We have a multi-time zone cohort today of some wonderful speakers who will be joining us over the next 45 minutes as we talk through what retail intelligence is, why it's needed, and how you can adopt an approach to being more data-driven about your retail operations, whether it's upstream or downstream in your supply chain. First and foremost, I'd like to introduce Frank Marteau, who is the MD of Arlo-Verisure, previously 18 years at P&G and Logitech, and based in Geneva. Welcome, Frank.
Welcome, everyone.
We have Tom Ridges, the CEO of Herdify, who's previously at Rackspace, and Microsoft, who is here to represent a data science perspective. Good morning, Tom.
Morning, Frank. Thanks for having me.
And we have Jonathan Lewis-Jones, affectionately known as JLJ, who is the Managing Director of Commerce at Publicis Group, who's working with a lot of international brands, and he's previously held commerce and leadership roles at Microsoft and Nokia. Welcome, JLJ.
Excellent. Thank you, Frank. Good to be here.
Of course, last but not least, our inimitable host, Mihir Mehta. My sincere apologies for waking you up at 3:30 in the morning. Thank you for joining us. Mihir is the CEO of Bomisco, a data engineering firm based out of SF, and previously the VP at Zyme, with deep experience from Cisco and GE. Thank you very much for hosting us today, Mihir.
Thanks for getting us together, Frank, and for waking me up at this time.
So let's dive right in. What is retail intelligence? Retail intelligence is business intelligence. It means turning data into insights that deliver upside. So how are you getting upside from insight? It's less about the bits and bytes and more about what you can do practically with that data to drive performance and commercial benefit. But this perspective changes depending where you are in the value chain. Today, we have four highly complementary but very different perspectives. We have Frank representing the voice of the brand. We have JLJ representing the agency and some of the issues that, as an agency servicing a lot of retailers and FMCG brands, how that comes together. We have Tom as the voice of the data scientist. How are we driving those insights? How are we making the insights actionable? And Mihir's perspective as the data engineer. What lurks beneath the iceberg? How do we keep all of the infrastructure and the plumbing working and moving that data forward? When we look at the definition of retail intelligence through these four perspectives, you can see that it's where you are in the value chain will largely determine what you can see and what you can do with that data. In the past, when we talk about a brand or a manufacturer, they've divided intelligence into two parts: digital twinning or modeling their supply chain, and then marketing will have as much visibility as they can afford into the customer journey. But a lot of things have changed over the last 10 years. A lot of things will continue to change over the coming 10 years as we look to things like generative AI. We look at the fundamental shifts in how data is being stored and moved and processed across an organization. How large teams, multidisciplinary teams, are coming together to see data as an enabler, not strictly an IT function. So whether you're the supplier down at the commodities level, the manufacturer who's looking at production data, the distributor who's got OMS and inventory data, an agency partner, most likely looking at paid media, sales, online analytics, the retailer who's looking at point of sale and traffic and building those data sharing relationships, or finally understanding that commerce and retail these days, 2023, it's no longer a linear path to purchase. The way of looking at the customer journey through the funnel is out of date. and we can't apply 2D thinking to solving a 3D problem. With that, I would like to hand over to our wonderful speakers to really validate, what do you think is driving the need for retail intelligence? We've looked at new channels, data issues, the skills within the team available to be data-driven, and the increasing complexity. Frank, what do you think is driving the need for retail intelligence, the number one factor? And it doesn't have to be on this list.
I think the number one factor is not retail intelligence, it's business intelligence. So is how you can really gather the insight from your different channel, customer, key player, and how you can really drive the right business decision for the future, to serve better your customer, but also to enhance your profitability with the most profitable choice, with the most relevant choice for the future.
Mihir, what do you think is the primary need for business intelligence applied to retail?
Yeah, so over the past, in the past 8 or 10 years, the volume of data has increased so much, right? If you think about just the channels that were available, you had the traditional channels, and now you have sort of app channels and mobile channels, and how do you sort of start gathering all the data from these newer channels, and connect that back to your traditional transactional data? I think that still is lacking, and the power of bringing those two pieces together is tremendous, and hopefully companies like brands as well as agencies and focus on that part of it. So I think there's a big gap there, because that really hurts the speed at which businesses can make decisions about what to do.
Thank you. Jonathan, you've got a unique perspective because you've seen a lot of brands within your agency and within your commerce division. What do you think is driving the need for business intelligence and retail intelligence?
So I think from my perspective, from a marketing or kind of agency perspective, one of the most important things or drivers of this retail intelligence concept is the need to start talking about commercial outcomes rather than individual capabilities. So if you're in an agency environment, you have teams that look after retail media, and other teams that look after SEO or product descriptions, another team that looks after e-merchandising, or another team that looks after analytics. The challenge is, in many brand organizations, those teams or silos are kind of replicated. And I think this is an opportunity now to start talking about how can all those capabilities work together to ultimately drive an outcome for your products to be visible and available across e-retail, and ultimately to drive sell-out of your product. But I'm certainly seeing a shift in the conversations we're having to talk more about outcomes rather than capabilities.
So Frank has identified that we need to drive commercial benefit, and intelligence is one of the best. Business intelligence is the best way to do that. Mihir's point is around managing this increasing volume and complexity of data. If you don't have systems in place to manage that complexity, it's going to become unwieldy. Jonathan, you're talking about the need to move beyond capabilities or these individual use cases and start looking at the outcomes you're optimizing for. Tom, from a data science perspective and largely working with brands, what do you see as the need for intelligence? Is it related to the other three speakers' perspectives? Is it deeper?
Yeah, no, it is, and a lot of what we see is about we work a lot with the marketing and the front end. Is they've had a lot of variable performance. They're dealing with consumers, and consumer behavior varies, and they're trying to get more insight to remove that variability. The marketing teams don't want to be reporting about variable performance to the SLT, right? They need more predictability. So therefore they're trying to get more insight to make better decisions so they can build a more predictable business, and better commerce back in. And then that conflicts with exactly what you've got on the bottom of the slides. But getting harder the skills is really hard, and we see a lot of businesses that actually the front end don't get access to necessarily the in-house resources, which creates a bit of frustration. It makes it harder for them to remove the variance in their results, and hey ho, the cycle continues.
Those are all deep needs, and I think getting this right from day one is hard. I think to understand now, we know what we need, but how did we arrive here, right? I think the rules have largely changed, right? The monolithic systems that we bought from SAP and Oracle and Microsoft 10 years ago, they're not necessarily the same places where you want to analyze the data. You've got business intelligence and data analytics teams who are analyzing the performance, but the environment for operating those tools isn't necessarily where you'd make the analysis. It's often the combination of data from disparate sources that drives intelligence. Secondarily, I think there's this great democratization of tools or point management solutions that help you visualize the data. But at any one time, Tom, you mentioned the usability problem. I have 100 different SaaS tools that are AI powered to do one thing really well. I don't have a unified view of my business because I'm a marketing manager. What would I care for the front office, back office thing that you mentioned? The front end is not seeing the back end. So here you can see my beautiful icons here. I'm going to start with the storefront, the voice of the brand. Frank, what do you believe characterized the old game, right? The old game of 10 years ago, and how you've moved into the new game, and what you think perhaps are some of the things coming down the pipe?
So in 2013, I was at P&G. I spent 18 years there, and data was already a key component of any business decision. And we used to say, you get what you measure. And in every single one-page memo to support a recommendation across all functions in the company, I think you need to really frame your thinking with hard facts. But you need to be selective. It's not about too many facts. It's about the right fact to support your recommendation. So at that time, the philosophy was really the less is more in terms of communication to frame your thinking. Now in 2023, with the pace of change, the pace of disruption, speed is king. And now I think we talk about real-time leadership. So what matters is to get really real-time business monitoring with all my KPIs, really from my data provider to really my customer, consumer, and you need to go beyond data. So data is really the main pillar. So it's the data scientists, now I call them intelligence scientists. So what matters is really not so much the data, is really the output from the data, is how, you can, what type of performance you can generate from the recommendation from the data. And I think this is really the main evolution, is really the complexity, the speed, and the real-time elements of it.
So moving on to the agency perspective here, right? So it's kind of different from Frank's perspective because you've got to do this over and over again. And your clients, your brands that you're dealing with, Jonathan, may be at different levels of data maturity in their operations. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach or leadership model. How do you think the game has evolved from 10 years ago to today from an agency perspective?
It's interesting. So I think 10 years ago, like marketing and sales teams in many organizations we're working with still were operating quite separately. We do brand campaigns and marketing teams that would generate demand and awareness, and then sales would just kind of happen through retail channels. But now, obviously, with the increased digitization of retail, everything's more connected, it's more complicated, and we can start to show kind of cause and effect with greater accuracy. But it's complicated because you've got brand budgets and trade budgets, and how do you merge the two, and lots of different stakeholders. So in terms of where we see this space going, We've been doing some work across a number of clients around this concept of really pushing brands to trade with retail partners. And what that means is, can we get all of these disparate data sets into one place, into one interface, and really run trading meetings? So looking at shared online sales targets, and looking at 3 simple levers of traffic, conversion, price, and trying to diagnose the problems based on benchmarking those 3 drivers. And importantly, I mean, it's as much about change management as it is about kind of data and tech, but actually getting the right people around that table in those trading meetings, whether that's every 7 days, every 14 days, people from the brand, from the retailer, from the agency. And then once you diagnose a problem, being able to essentially assign that action to the right person around the table. If we know that traffic from CRM this period is down, then CRM manager at the brand, work with your agency partner to get that traffic volume back on track. So it's not easy, but I think it's as much about change management in these big organizations and literally bringing people to the table rather than just having the data available.
I think you're spot on there. 10 years ago, it would be uncommon to have those 4 or 5 different teams around the same table. Maybe it would have happened once a year or once every 6 months. And now the fact that you've surfaced this insight, you're all looking at this, the same version of truth, let's call it, and you're able to make decisions in a collaborative way based on the data at much shorter intervals. That's quite innovative. I think, having had the pleasure to work with you last year, there were also some other things that you turned me on to, actually, where retailers have become media companies, where the supply chain or the data sharing relationships between the manufacturer, the retailer, and the resellers has only just started to evolve. The role of data has really come into its own within the agency. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting. Like everyone will see all the noise in the market at the moment about retail media, and it's true, right? Retailers are trying to monetize their media inventory and their data, but really, I think sometimes that could be a massive distraction, because these advances in retail media are just a proxy for retailers becoming more digitally sophisticated, and that's the opportunity for brands. So in 2 to 3 years, the way in which a brand needs to show up in front of a retailer is going to fundamentally change. Real-time supplier trading dashboards, APIs of performance data, personalized product detail pages, localized store analytics, the kind of list goes on. Which is why I think it's a fascinating kind of dynamic space.
A wonderful insight, JLJ. Thank you. Tom, I have in my notes to refer to you as a data scientist, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to borrow Frank's interpretation. I'm going to call you an intelligence scientist. So from the perspective of an intelligence scientist, you're kind of working at the cutting edge of using AI to deliver uplift for brands and using data science approaches. How do you think the game has changed over the last 10 years? And what would Herdify have been possible 10 years ago?
Yeah, it's not that dissimilar to points both Jonathan and Frank have made, really. Like 10 years ago, it was the big data era, right? Everyone was trying to store as much data as they could. I lose track on the number of projects where people would do a 5-year data strategy project, get to the end and they've got no value out of it, right? Because they didn't know what they were trying to do with it. It was just about hoarding the data and we'll find value. We look at it now, we've got a huge skills gap with data science. More and more job roles need data science. So for me, the kind of game is less about just hoarding lots of data and working it out. It's asking better questions for the business first off, and then executing that on top of a better set of tools. We're in an era where there's a lot of noise, there's more and more noise in our data. So if you're not clear with what you're trying to ask, you get a lot of noise in your results. The compounding issue there with the skills gap is a lot of businesses just won't have the talent to answer a lot of those questions. And this is where, for businesses like Herdify, and there's lots of lots of tools like us, we bring really deep specialist information that most businesses won't be able to do themselves. So they don't need to hire as wide a pool of sort of tech talent, because fundamentally it's not going to be there. We're going to have a big issue with that.
So we've talked about, from Herdify's perspective, the data and the intelligence scientist perspective. What about looking forward 10 years, right? 10 years ago, if someone had asked me what is generative AI, I would have given them a blank stare. I didn't know what it is. And now, you know, now it seems to be on everyone's mind. What do you think the role of AI will be in driving this new game?
I think if you start making predictions about AI, you set yourself up for a fall. You know, we've gone through many AI summers and winters since the the 50s, right? You know, this is how long the conversation's been out. I think my personal view of this, and I read a lot on the subject, is there's a lot of hype around what we can do today, and this fully autonomous feature is a lot further out than we think. And we're very good when we produce new insight at building new roles around it. So we're not going to replace the role of data scientists and humans in this. We're going to work out, there's going to be the questions. People like Frank and Jonathan are going to be asking the data teams just more difficult questions that those tools haven't yet been built to answer. And there'll be new data sets that get found, and we need to work out how to exploit. Horrible word, exploit. Unfortunately, we use it a lot in the data science. We soften that when we talk to the marketers, but yeah, I think it's just going to help us do more in terms of we'll just be able to go wider, because a lot of the stuff we do today will be something else will take care of. We're still going to be just as busy trying to find new ways to give our businesses some form of advantage. So what you're really telling me is that as a CMO, I shouldn't put ChatGPT on top of my marketing data swamp? Yeah, well, I always look at ChatGPT. Like, index is a small fraction of the information out there. There's this thing that it's doing some crazy magic. It's indexing data that's out there. It does a lot of clever stuff, but it's a minority of the information. And with a lot of information, I think Frank's talked about it. It's not just about the insights, how you use it, and this is when you need good people who can actually execute on it. Someone can write a generic business strategy, doesn't mean it's any good or it's going to work. It can look good on paper. So yeah, I wouldn't be deploying it as the central decision engine anytime soon. So Mihir, from the data engineering perspective, in the previous slide, you talked about the increasing volume and size of data that we've collected over the years, but the approach kind of conflicts with what Tom is saying. I think what Tom is saying is and what Frank is saying is that it's not size that counts, it's how you use it, right? How do you feel that the need for retail intelligence and this becoming data driven and focusing on outcomes, how do you think that has evolved over the last 10 years? You've really had a front row seat to the infrastructure and the engineering that's evolved over the last 10 years. What have you seen?
Right. So, one thing I'll tell you about what's not happened is that, 10 years ago, data was still in silos. Now it's still in silos. So some of these things haven't changed, right? You mentioned something about sort of monolithic systems. Yeah. We kind of still live in that world, and these are the factors that sort of limit the dynamic nature of decision-making that, Frank spoke about, right? Or, the skills gap, that Tom's talking about. So some of these things, unfortunately, are still the same. If you think about, picking the right data and kind of, making recommendations and making, quick decisions. If you think about the number of apps, actually, as an example, on Google Play or the App Store has increased 5-fold in the past 10 years, right? There's 5 times more apps today than there were in, let's say, 2013, right? That time as well, Google had just acquired AdMob. We just had sort of search display ads and AdMob kind of brought in sort of app display and other display ads, web display ads. We didn't have TikTok, right, as a means to analyze what's happening in the market, right? YouTube was, very different. Twitter hardly existed. Instagram, I don't even think existed at that time. And these are all sort of new channels, right? These are new sort of avenues to kind of explore sort of within the flywheel of retail intelligence, which of these variables is really impacting the brands, right? And, not all of these may matter for every brand, but certainly some of them do, so for Frank's business or, for Jonathan's, clients, some clients, maybe, TikTok is more, useful to kind of analyze and understand from an intelligence standpoint. In some cases, maybe Instagram, and in some cases, it may be sort of just a traditional, what did I sell yesterday, and how much am I shipping to customers, right? So I think there's a lot more data, but the systems are still not keeping pace with or we're not connecting the dots between all these data elements, right? The system. So I think that's really proving to be a challenge, and once we those are the limiting factors, and we need to kind of really get past that to be able to kind of provide, let's say someone like Frank with instant decisions, right, or quick decisions with the right variables, for Jonathan to make the recommendations that are needed, for his clients, and for Tom to kind of really engage with the marketing teams to kind of say that, hey, as a data science sort of organization, don't spend time kind of matching and collecting and sort of transforming data. Focus on kind of delivering the insights, right? Again, talking about sort of the retail intelligence flywheel.
So I think that's a good point to move on from, where a bigger, better, faster silo is not the outcome that you're optimizing for. What are the key challenges for sales leaders, for commercial leaders, for technical leaders? I'm really trying to think about, the people that we're going to speak to today. They'll understand the challenges from these 4 different perspectives, but not really what's causing them or what's driving them. Frank, from a brand perspective, or leadership within a brand, right? You have many hats to wear, I'm sure, but what do you think are the key challenges that leaders like yourself are having today when it comes to building intelligence capabilities, and why do you think these challenges exist?
I think what I see, it's good to get data, but it's better to use them. So I think from a business standpoint, my main challenge was really the human adoption. How the team will adopt, how the team will use, and how the team will go beyond data. And when I joined my new company, obviously, I set up, a 5 years long range plan, a new strategy, where to play, where not to play, how to win. And I define really one cultural element. I want to become a data-driven company. And then I set up a team around the company, across function, across geographies, and they work together to foster really the right path to achieve this ambition. And I think they use a methodology from the MIT, and we select Bomisco for this work. I think we had really a great strategic partnership with Bomisco, and Bomisco helped us to really frame and increase the data liquidity, to get the right assets, the right standardization, the right accuracy about the data, because I think this is really a key pillar. Then Bomisco helped us to reduce the friction, how to automate processes across the company, and then how to level the playing field within the team, how to make sure that many more people can really use the data, embrace the data, and how we can manage the rollout. And today, what I can tell you is 3 years after this setup, I think we have a very efficient Power BI tool, visualization, up and running, used across the entire company. where people are always picking the right document, the right data to support the recommendation. And the beauty is that we save a lot of time, a lot of productivity about getting the data, but to spend more time on where you bring the added value, which is really the thinking and the recommendation for the business. And this has been a huge transformation. So thanks to Bomisco on this partnership.
Congratulations to you both. It sounds like you're far ahead of the curve, and you've earned the right to claim what best practice is because you've actually gone out and done it. Jonathan, I guess you've got two hats to wear here as well. What are the challenges you have in, running a data-driven division within an agency, and what are the challenges that your clients are facing? So I'm interested in the internal and the external perspective that you bring.
I think the two are linked. I think from a client or brand perspective, it's being able to understand the kind of so what of the data. Actually, we've got the insight, what's the action that we need to take? And then I think if you flip that and think about it from an agency perspective, once we understand the actions that need to be taken, it's about being able to align the different capabilities that I talked about earlier, but importantly, activate at the speed of retail. And I think that's a critical sort of distinction. Years ago, I used to work in advertising. We had the Tesco account. There were two separate teams. There was a brand team and there was a retail team. Now, the retail team, it was very offline. They turned around sort of press ads in 24-hour cycles. This was kind of 20 years ago. But that's a kind of good analogy. Like often big agencies are used to big lengthy productions, and actually those that are winning in this space are able to collapse lots of different capabilities together and operate at the speed of retail. And the trade board or trading dashboard I mentioned earlier is intended to diagnose those problems and provide those briefs so that you can genuinely activate in 7-day cycles and see the effect of your action in 7 days' time in the next meeting.
What do you mean by activate? You've mentioned moving at the speed of retail. What do you mean by activate?
So what I mean is, if we say that a number of SKUs appear on the third page of a retailer's search results rather than the first page, then the actions that we might take would be, we would activate retail media differently. So we would buy different keywords. We would modify the product descriptions or the kind of the SEO, or we would optimize the digital content that sits on product detail pages.
So an activation in this context for the brand or the agency teams is taking direct action as a result of knowing what the data has shown. Yeah,
and being able to integrate multiple capabilities. Sure. in order to do that.
So moving at the speed of retail, activations, and taking action, measurable action to drive an outcome, that seems to be the state of nirvana. But how do you stitch it all together, right? We were talking about monolithic systems and moving from one silo to another. I guess my next question is going to go to Mihir, which is how do you do silo busting? How do you, when we look at what lies beneath the iceberg, forgive me, it's a terrible management consulting analogy, everyone uses it, but it's true. What's not visualized here, and what we're not really talking about, is the technology, like around ETL data pipelines, where the data is stored, moving it from A to B, the unsexy jobs of data engineering. How would you solve these challenges for Jonathan, for example?
Right. So I think we got to get away from these, what did Jonathan you refer to as big lengthy productions, right? And there's really tools at the back end that kind of help you iterate really quickly, right? So for example, let's extract the data from let's say Google Analytics or let's say your web traffic sources, right? You mentioned traffic as one of the factors that you look at. there are ways to kind of do that really quickly. Let's just get the data, forget about which team owns it and, who has it, and, just, let's just get it extracted. The team that probably is responsible for analyzing it, has their own view of it, but let's connect it to different data sources, right? So get all the data sources, start connecting them, because there are tools at the back end to be able to do that. And I think in order to do that, it's kind of what Frank mentioned, right? A key component of this is to kind of get the organization challenges out of the way, right? Which is, to kind of make sure that the silo leaders, right, whether you're in marketing or different parts of brand marketing, or another aspect of operations, you kind of have to break down the silos, let people, give people the goal of, here's what I need as a general manager, as a CEO would, and set a target based on outcomes to be kind of met really quickly. Right now, I'm talking about, I was trained under Jack Welch's GE, right? And that was actually, what it was. It was like, whoever the business leader was setting a goal, kind of saying that, okay, I gotta see an outcome, within the next 3 or 4 weeks. Otherwise we're not going to waste 6 months calling people from all over the world, fly in for these meetings or Zoom meetings and do that. Let's iterate quickly. And I think we have the ability to do that, with the different types of tools, right? I mean, even if it's, scripts within, the open source community, there's Apache Kafka sort of tools out there, Python, NiFi, there's a whole bunch of backend tools which really don't matter for anyone else. That's, provide the reliable sort of data that can be visualized and actioned upon by users like Frank and Jonathan.
So I think one of the key challenges that I'm seeing from within clients is, I keep coming back to this point, it's that the tools that I use to run my business are not the best environment for me to analyze the performance of my business. And we're all kind of driving at the same thing here, where it is the combining of different data sets, or the agility with which you manage those data pipelines, and you're able to pipe it to the right people. That's good process and good governance, right? But Tom, my final question to you is, at what point do you end up with a data cloud that becomes all domineering, right? A lot of clients I've spoken to, they don't want SAP, S/4HANA, traditional on-prem data warehousing technologies. They want Snowflake, right? They want Databricks. They want these newer environments that allow them federated access to multiple data stores. And the processes that you guys run kind of activate that data. You're bringing the insights directly to the brand, as opposed to letting them, hunt for themselves within Snowflake.
Yeah, there's two things here. It comes back to a core theme we've spoken about today. This is about how do we get insight that's usable to the business rather than just data for data's sake. A big issue, and how Frank described it, is not common, right? There's a lot of businesses that struggle to give partners access to the data, right? So the privacy teams need to be involved in every decision, right? Now, with a lot of these modern tools, it's really easy to categorize data and say, well, look, this is non-PII data. There's nothing personally identifiable. So from a GDPR, it's safe. It's going to a company within the UK. So that's a low risk scenario. So we'll let that out. Hang on, this is PII and it's going to the US. We need to bring compliance involved. But we don't see this automation happening often. So it means compliance are involved in any decision, which means when the teams are trying to, work with outside people, it just grinds things to a halt, right? And things back up. And then linked to that, and I think this is a big thing that might help, we'll see with the skills gap, but is I call it sort of data literacy. I don't think businesses are investing enough in data literacy. We don't see it enough in marketing, but in a lot of teams, to challenge the numbers that tools spit out. A tool like ours has numbers, right? You shouldn't believe them, you should challenge them. Google spits out numbers, right? If you've got high levels of data literacy, you empower people to challenge those numbers and say, well, okay, well, what does that mean in the bigger context? Sure, like Google are giving me this ROAS or CPA number, you know, we don't need to know what that is for the sake of this conversation, but how does that fit into the broader piece we're trying to do with acquiring customers? And if businesses don't invest in the data literacy piece, they're going to have these great pools of data that are available to them that people are just going to nod at and say, well, that's what the data is telling me, let's do it. And then, you know, big topic, we'll just gloss over it. But then we start hitting this correlation causation thing where people go, this happened, it must be the reason, and it's not the reason. So, you know, we need these modern platforms for how Frank's got it set up, that people can get access to the data, and then you need people who are able to critically think about what data means. And that's the biggest challenges I think that a lot of retailers are going to have, because they just don't have those things in place.
As I listen to you speak and I'm trying to weave the answers together in my mind, so I'm coming back to a conversation I had with a data scientist 2 weeks ago who said, if it's giving me the answer that I want, I've probably done something wrong.
Yeah.
So we're speaking less and less about the infrastructure and the platform level, and you know, we're assuming that we've got good governance, and you know, the investment in these platforms has been made, and now the conversation, the pendulum has swung radically in the opposite direction, where now I've made all of my investment in data platform, data engineering. Now I need people. Now I need data literate people to follow my business intelligence methodology to say, what is the outcome? What is the decision? What is the commercial benefit? And how am I going to use data in my day-to-day job? It's no longer this, you know, construction site or demolition site of engineering. It's become business users driving action or activation from the data. And that seems to be the nirvana that they're moving towards. Briefly, 2 minutes each. Think of a use case that you've worked on particularly. So building a retail intelligence dashboard, or integrating supply chain, sales, marketing, analytics data. Thinking about your 4 respective roles and perspectives. Frank, what is one unique perspective based on a use case that you would give to our audience today? 60 seconds.
I remember when I was GM at Logitech, I think we set up a team of data scientists attached to the CIO of the company. And I got this first meeting with this young, very smart data scientist, and he came with really a cloud of all consumer sentiments about my category, my brand at Amazon, and it was really mind-opening, because it helped to really frame where my brand is positioned, where my competitor are positioned, and where the expectation of the consumer are. And I think from this data cloud, I think we reposition our claim, we reframe our value proposition, and this has really transformed, you know, our trends, our sales acceleration. So I think this was really a case that popped clearly in my mind.
That's a fantastic and insightful perspective. Thank you, Frank. Jonathan, 60 seconds for your use case. What would you tell our audience today?
So I think, and we touched on it earlier, but I think the most impactful use case have kind of been across recently is this idea of a trading dashboard. So trade board is something we've worked on as a business, which really enables, you know, getting the right people around the table to agree on the diagnosis and instructing or briefing the appropriate actions. I think it's, you know, brands that sell D2C do this every day. You know, they trade, there's a level of automation. Those brands that sell through retailers, this is a very different way of working, but it's absolutely where brands need to get to and have the confidence to push retailers to work in this way.
Brilliant. So I'm going to put a link into some trade board research later on. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Tom, a particular use case or a client that you've been working on, what would you summarize for our audience?
Yeah, so very quickly, we work in the field of human analytics, behavioral analytics, and the you know, the science is that the biggest influencer on our decisions are those that we influence, that we hang around with, right? So if you're trying to motivate people to do something, target areas where people are talking about your brand. And we work with a great company called Diamond Whites. They're a teeth whitening, you know, beauty company. And by using this data, using what we've talked about today to answer, look, where should we be spending our money, we're able to drive over 50% of their revenue, so 50%, 56% of their revenue from just 5% of their ad spend, which means the rest of their spend can really go out on that. You've still got to go fishing, you've got to spread your nets, but it means they're being really efficient where they know they can win, and it allows them to go and spend more money spending wider. So it just enables them to grow at a time when growth is really hard.
56% of 5% of the media budget. That's practically unheard of. I can
Good number. Good number.
I can see Jonathan's teeth grinding here. The same with mine. Great case study. I'll put a link to some resources around that. And you know, congratulations on what you're doing. I think modeling word of mouth to reduce or to make spend more efficient in marketing, fantastic place to be. Now, Mihir, there are two use cases that come to my mind when I think about the deep plumbing and making sure that the pipes work. But I'm not going to prejudice our online event with my thinking. What would you give as an example and a perspective, the most important one that you've worked on in the last couple of years? 60 seconds, over to you.
Yeah, you know, I think you know, brands and companies need to just stop thinking about force-fitting data into specific forms and formats, etc. So, you know, for example, we work with Burton Snowboards and like Universal Audio, smaller brands that have mom and pop stores. You know, these are resellers, retailers, you know, they may be in a kiosk or a mall or whatever it is. And, you know, they don't have the ability, they don't have the resources to communicate your transactions with them as quickly. You know, just get it from them, have them send extracts from their invoicing system. You know, at a minimum, everyone has an invoicing system. So just plug into that and let's pull the data, and then we can kind of figure out, you know, whatever you need from that, right? What time it was sold, which products were sold, you know, what price, you know, how many units, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's the key thing, that we have the back-end tools that can transform data in you know, complex data in many different ways. So let's just get hold of the information and then decide on whether it's valuable or not, but get hold of it.
I think, you know, being able to work at their level, not just the high data science level, but being able to take data from the point of production and making it consumable through that process. I think that's a really wonderful use case. Thank you.
Right.
So I'd like to wrap up now and saying we've talked about the challenges, we've talked about the drivers of those pain points, we've talked about what best practice looks like and the 4 perspectives. I'd like to propose an approach for those that are kind of beginning to look at outcomes and activation from data, or those that are kind of maybe a little bit into the process but have stalled and are looking for a way to find their way back to the light. I'd like to propose 2 approaches. If you're in a technical role, I recommend a back to front approach. And if you're in a commercial role, we recommend a front to back approach. A back to front approach starts with the source systems, the available data and the model. And really you're looking for use cases. You may be part of a digital transformation team. You may be part of a working group that's looking at automations, but chances are you're probably struggling to make impactful changes with the data because you're being pulled in 2 different directions. Somebody's bike shedding, they're talking about, I want a blue bar chart instead of a green bar chart, when really your core expertise is building a unified data model. Conversely, if you're in a commercial role, then you probably know what you want. if I were to have this discussion with Frank, I'm probably not going to talk to you about database connectors, API interfaces, turning spreadsheets and the role of Python and SQL scripts and transformation. I'm gonna ask you, what questions do you want answered? I'm going to ask you, how will you act upon that intelligence and how quickly do you need it? Does it really need to be real time? Does everything need to be real time? Do you want end to end? So we'll think about the scorecard, the dashboard, the questions, and we'll think about the components of that intelligence, not so much the technicality of it. You don't want to deal with data ops and data quality issues. And chances are you may have multiple vendors attacking this problem, right? The cloud vendor, the database vendors, the managed services providers, the ISVs. So what's this new approach? Well, it depends on where you are in the data journey and whether you're in a technical role or a commercial role. So understanding that in retail intelligence, in business intelligence and data in general, there are 6 immutable stages. There's identifying the data sources. There's building the extract, transform, load data pipelines. There's processing the data to turn it into something usable. There's staging the data when it's structured or semi-structured in the warehouse or the data lake. There's visualization of the data where you're presenting this. For Frank and Jonathan, they mentioned showing the data to the right people and getting these multidisciplinary teams making decisions faster because they've got access to the data. But you can see that the previous 4 steps had to happen really well before they could develop that capability. And then finally, we're talking about decisioning. What is the outcome of that activation? Now, from a technology-led perspective, you really want to be starting with the data source, understanding data lineage, ontology, accessibility to the data and roles. But it's radically different if you're a commercial leader, where you're going to go start with the front and work your way back. You're going to say, in order to drive commercial benefit, I need sales uplift. I want to reduce time to market. I want to prepare for a product launch, or I want to improve my return on ad spend. Whatever that metric may be, you're going to talk about, this is the decision, this is how we'll arrive at this decision, and these are the inputs to that decision that I want shown. So now that I've laid out the approach back to front or front to back, I would really like to be less structured now and just throw this open to the floor. Where do you guys see this new approach being applied? Tom.
Yeah, I think you've summarized it very well in terms of the different entry points. Where I'm really excited about is this commercially led approach. I think everything with data, as we talked about, and we talked about 10 years ago, and it was about just collecting data. We still need great tools and people to do that, but actually having more people looking at what questions are we starting to ask. That's the important thing. I speak to lots of large organizations who'd hire teams of data scientists and say, tell us some stuff. And they're like, well, what do you want to know? You're now getting leaders like Frank saying, this is what I want to know. So organizations that are coming to the table with this commercially led approach that says, this is what I want to know, and then working with people like Bomisco to bring that together to facilitate it, I think it's going to help. Well, it's what people need to do to actually enhance their businesses rather than just sit on data and, as Mihir said, just sitting in silos that's not getting the value taken out of it.
Just for the record, Tom has not been paid to say that. And he's never seen this material before. So thank you for your honest insights. Yeah. Jonathan, what do you think?
So I think something that's, we've talked about how this is, the direction of travel is clear, and this way of working will be implemented in terms of brands trading with retail partners. I think something we haven't talked a lot about is a lot of the unlearning that needs to happen within some organizations. There's nothing stopping all this data being put in one place. It's a lot of the legacy ways of working and commercial agreements and organizational complexity that kind of gets in the way. So whether that's a trade agreement between a brand and a retailer, historically it was one number, not much transparency or structure on how that investment is being made. It's a sales tax, the cost of doing business. Like that for me is the interesting other side of the disruption. It's not just about the data and tech, it's about the commercial agreements and the ways in which brands and retailers essentially kind of conduct business and draw up their commercial agreements. So I think it will happen, but I think there is there's a sort of natural inhibitor.
Yeah, I mean, we're not really talking about solutions, features, and benefits here. We've spent an hour going into depth about really understanding the problem and the driver of best practice, and I completely empathize with the point and go beyond. I have compassion for those that are stuck in the operating environment where things like privacy, centralized IT, lack of data literacy are holding them back. But really, it's incumbent on them to make a start. And this is why I think we're talking about the approach, not the solution, because that's where we need to meet customers on their terms. It's so interesting that you mentioned this is a tax on productivity because you're still dealing with old ways of working. Frank, you've largely achieved this, not once, but a couple of times in your career. So you must have done a version of this, even though it's been prepared independently. What's your first impression of this as an approach for best practice?
I love the framework. I think it makes a lot of sense. Clearly, you need always to start with the end state in mind. Okay, where do you want to go and how do you want to go? And what I see here is really the ability to work across the organization multifunctionally to really set up very smooth processes from tech to function to any type of resources in the organization, and to work internally, but also externally with partners. So, I always say to the team, bring the outside in, so just do not look at our business only, really try to think about what is on the agenda of our business partner, retailer, pure player of this world. So I think this is really key to make it very smooth, but also part of the culture. Multifunctional teamwork, I think, is crucial on that.
That's very insightfully articulated. Thank you, Frank. Mihir, you live and breathe this, but from a certain perspective, you don't make the decisions using that data. Bomisco, in its own words, is a plumbing company that will underpin a lot of this as a data engineering firm, but there may be, friction over the decisions and the realization of the commercial benefits because we don't get past the visualization stage, or the approach that the client is taking is kind of shoeboxed. How can this approach help your customers get out of that way of thinking and help them, refocus and reframe their initiatives, whether you call it transformation, automation, data ops? How can you see this helping customers get to that next level?
Yeah. So firstly, Frank, I think that the last box, the decisioning, we should amplify that, right? That's sort of the most important piece, And I think decision makers and people who own business outcomes need to be much more demanding of everyone responsible for all the other boxes on the left, because I think we're a little too I don't want to say complacent, but we let it go to kind of say that, oh yeah, this data processing cannot happen because of X, Y, and Z. I'm sorry, business outcome owners, decisioning is the most important thing, and everything else to the left of it can happen really quickly. And I think you need to be more demanding to make it happen. It's got to happen. Otherwise, you're not going to reach that, speed of decision making, dynamism, dynamic decisions, which I think are going to be increasingly important in retail, or just not just in retail intelligence, but in all aspects of business decision making.
So to conclude, Frank, 30 seconds. What's your key takeaway for our attendees?
I think my key takeaway is that data, is direct access to added value. So I think you need to think like that. And I think, spot the right talent in your organization that are really willing to transform and to really bring this data alive in your organization. And you will be amazed by the outcome.
Thank you. Tom, 30 seconds. Key takeaway for our audience.
Data science is not a data discipline, it's a business discipline. It's about providing value to the business. So it's going to mirror what Frank says, very close. You need people who can understand what the business is trying to achieve. They just know how to answer the question. That's the only difference with them.
Jonathan, over to you.
Don't let your agencies talk to you about individual marketing capabilities. Talk about the outcome that you want to drive and let them work it out.
I think that's going to antagonize a lot of people who are quite happy with agencies that are quite happy to take our money. But okay, Mihir, 30 seconds. All right.
Yeah. So I think the key thing here, I would say, is that break down the silos, right? The organizational silos, the data silos, and make sure that, all the data sources are being connected. Whether you use, one is more important or not, doesn't matter, because the variable that you think is impacting your business, is around somewhere. It's just that you may not know about it. So at least have that in your possession and then, analyze it. But really break down the silos, data and organizational. That's sort of my key thing.
That concludes our first event talking about the role of data and AI in retail intelligence. I would like to give a massive thank you to the four of you who've brought not just a global perspective, Frank Marteau in Geneva, Mihir Mehta in San Francisco with a global team. Jonathan, you're representing a multidisciplinary global agency, and Tom, your perspective in London, and of course me, your little old host in Lisbon. I think this has been a multi-time zone, multi-perspective approach to building knowledge. Tom Ridges from Herdify, Jonathan Lewis-Jones from Publicis Group, Mihir Mehta from Bomisco, and Frank Marteau of Verisure Arlo. And I'd like to thank you guys for deep knowledge. This is going to help a lot of people. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
You guys.
Excellent.
Thanks, Frank.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.